Welcome to Morning Hava. On this podcast, we are going to dive into fun, educational, and sometimes hard topics with individuals, experts, and storytellers. Our aim is to fill your day with something that gives you a little life. Hava literally means life, to give life, and we want to help empower you to live your best life no matter what leg of the journey you are on. Whether you are preparing for pregnancy, birth, or parenting, we hope to fill your cup with a little Hava for the journey. So grab your favorite drink, or if you're like me, 2 or 3, and join me for the Morning Hava. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited that you're here. Happy Mother's Day. It's Mother's Day week. And this is the second year in a row that I have been sick on Mother's Day. Last year was much worse. It was like just starting out sickness. Right now I'm at the tail end of it, but this last week our family got hit hard and it sucked. And I just have to be honest, I'm having a day and I'm like, oh my gosh, sometimes it's just hard, you know? I did scream into a pillow today twice, and sometimes that rage is real. That comes when you're tired, you're exhausted. The last 2 days, my kids have been up at 5 a.m. And I didn't get to rest much while sick, because when you're sick, you still have to parent. You don't really get to rest and recover. And I am tired. And it just, I don't know. And I feel weird on Mother's Day. I'm not sure why. Maybe because last year I was sick and this year I'm sick, so we didn't really do much. But yeah, it's an interesting holiday for sure. A lot goes on. I mean, I talked about it last week. It can be exciting. It can be sad. You could be feeling grief. You could be feeling rage that maybe you're not getting to do what you want to today, even though you're a mom. There's a lot that can go on, but I just want to say that I see you, all of you. I am you, and we're in this together. I know last week I said that I was going to share some stuff on foster care this week because it's foster care awareness, but I'm actually going to save that for next week. Today we have an extra long episode. I had thought about dividing it into 2, but I really wanted to keep Andrea's story as a whole for you this week, because I think that it also really embraces motherhood and the ups and the downs that can come with it. And I'm so grateful for her sharing her story with us. We're going to hear from her about her having big babies. You guys, one of her babies that she birthed vaginally is over 11 pounds. And I can't wait for you to hear her story and how she prepared herself. And it's such an inspiration to hear from her. The other part of her story includes loss and grief. And so we're going to go through it all today and hear from her. And I really enjoyed talking with her, and just really grateful for her being so vulnerable and open and sharing her story with us. So I just want to thank Andrea and honor her today in her motherhood journey. Before we dive into this episode, 2 things. This week we are sponsored by Jenny Kane and LifeMD. So you will be hearing a couple ads during the episode from those 2 companies. You've heard me talk about them before. And then also I wanted to talk a little bit about big babies before we head into the episode, because it is a huge pet peeve of mine as a doula when my client gets told, or anybody gets told, that they have a big baby. I kid you not, at a baby shower about a year ago, there was 3 women there. There wasn't tons of people there. There was 3 women there who all said their doctors told them that they had big babies and they were getting induced early. And I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, because here's a couple of statistics surrounding it. Although ultrasounds are right about half the time and wrong about half the time when they predict big babies, 1 out of every 3 women in the United States are told that they have a big baby at the end of pregnancy, while only 1 in 10 babies is actually born big. So that is 2/3 of the time they tell you that your baby is big. It's not. And ultrasounds are usually anywhere between 15% above or 15% below your baby's actual birth weight. So they're not very accurate. And even if they tell you you have a big baby, one thing that I want to say is, so what? So what? Like, what does that mean? It means there are a few slight risks that could happen that I'm going to talk about, but overall, it's them talking to you and planting that seed in your head and then pushing for induction and other things that are actually more harmful than a big baby itself. So what is your chance that your baby might have difficulty with birth because of their shoulders for being big? It's about 7 to 15% of big babies have difficulty with birth because of their shoulders, but the majority of these cases are handled very well by your care provider with no harmful consequences. There is a small risk of permanent nerve damage due to stuck shoulders happening in about 1 out of every 555 babies who weigh between 8 pounds 13 ounces and 9 pounds 15 ounces, and 1 out of every 175 babies who weigh between 9 pounds and 15 ounces or greater. So you can see there that the risk does go up. It is still way under 1%, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. So that is information that you deserve to know. Instead of having a provider make a choice for you and say, you have a big baby, we need to induce. Well, what are the actual risks? What are the numbers? That's why I'm sharing them with you, because you are a smart, intelligent person who can make these decisions for themselves. You don't need somebody telling you what is risky for you. You can decide what's risky for you or not. And you might agree with your provider. You might be like, that's way too big of a risk. Yes. Or you might say no. And there might be other chances where your provider's like, I don't think it's that risky. And you could be like, whoa, I think it is. So that's why you deserve to have the exact numbers. I cannot tell you how many times, especially when it comes to VBAC and other things like that, where providers are like, it's so much riskier to do this thing. And it's like, it's 0.5% riskier. You deserve to know that number instead of being fear-mongered into something. So do you need to have an induction if they suspect a big baby? No. Induction can lower the chance of shoulder dystocia from 7% to 4%. So it can lower it by 3%, and the chance of birth fractures from 2% to 0.4%. But research has shown that inductions don't really have any impact on reducing on nerve injuries or NICU admissions. They actually may increase the risk that you will have a severe tear, and they may also increase the risk that your baby will need to have treatment for jaundice. So the best timing for induction is not clear. Most evidence comes from early induction for big babies from 37 to 39. So in there, like I said, there's the numbers of you can decrease your risk of shoulder dystocia by 3%, but you might increase your risk of a severe vaginal tear and treatment for jaundice. So what about planning a C-section? Unfortunately, it would take nearly 3,700 unnecessary cesareans to prevent one case of permanent injury due to shoulder dystocia in a baby that is suspected of weighing 9 pounds 15 ounces or greater. And right, those suspicions are not accurate. There are both benefits and risks to elective cesareans, and risks include higher rates of complications for mothers and babies, as well as elevated risk in future pregnancies. For these reasons and more, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists say that elective cesareans may be considered with an estimated fetal weight of 11 pounds or greater. So that's ACOG, who is the founding practitioner for big babies. They put out, not just babies in general. They are the ones who kind of set the tone and put how best practices out there for your provider. So if your provider is telling you you have a 9-pound baby and you should schedule a cesarean, they aren't following best practices. If there's a suspected big baby of 11 pounds or greater, that's the only time that an elective cesarean would really potentially benefit you. But once again, those ultrasounds are not accurate, and you get to decide what you think is best for you. Are there drawbacks to your provider telling you that you have a suspected big baby. So many studies have shown that the suspicion of a big baby typically increases the risk of cesarean without improving the health of the mother or baby. If doctors think that you have a big baby, they're more likely to diagnose your labor as stalled or pressure you into a cesarean compared to a woman who has a big baby, but it was not suspected at all. About half the time when they suspect a big baby, the prediction will have been wrong. So I think that that's so interesting. Just when we talk about this a little bit in the episode, like just planting that seed in your head that you have a big baby, they're way more likely to talk you into inducing. And the cesarean rate does go up. The studies show that it increases the cesarean rate without improving your outcome or the baby's outcome. So even if you have a provider who's telling you this, I kind of see that as a big flag, as a red flag, because that means they're already pushing for induction, cesarean. They're looking for things to go wrong in your labor versus labors where the patients aren't told anything and they have a big baby and everything is fine. So the bottom line here is the main problem with big babies is that it's hard to predict if you're going to have one or not. And we don't know ahead of time which babies are going to be big and which ones are going to have problems. So you want to talk to your provider about their usual treatment for suspected big babies to get an idea of their routine practice. It's also a good idea to find out if your provider trains regularly on how to manage shoulder dystocia, as this situation can happen with a baby of any size, not just big babies. And training has been shown to decrease the chances of a baby experiencing permanent injury due to shoulder dystocia if they are well trained. So I want to include this, what I just talked about, in the show notes. So in the show notes, there's going to be a 1-page handout from Evidence-Based Birth that talks all about suspected big babies. And at the bottom, there are links to all the studies included that all of this information is based on. So I wanted to put that out there before we dive into the episode because I think that it's so important. If you are creating a birthing plan, put this on there. Ask your provider, how do you manage suspected big babies? That is going to give you a clue into how they're going to manage your birth and how they're going to handle other things that potentially come up. And that's going to help you find the right support team for you. All right, we are going to dive into this episode with Andrea again. I cannot wait for you to hear from her. She is just such a blessing. Her story is so amazing, and I'm just so grateful that she is on the podcast today. All right, everyone, I'm excited about today's episode. I have on Andrea with us today, Andrea Ahonen, and we are going to talk about birth stories. You all know that I love birth story episodes, and I actually found her on Instagram. I had made a post on Instagram about big babies because as a birth worker, it is a really big pet peeve of mine when people automatically say, oh, I have a big baby, so I have to get induced or I have to have a C-section, because I've seen it go wrong so many times and the babies are 7 pounds, and the studies around that just do not support that. So she had commented on a post. I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to come on the podcast and share your birth stories with me. So I'm really excited to have her here with us today. So thank you so much, Andrea, for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Liz. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So when I saw your comment, because your first baby was over 10 pounds and your second baby was over 11 pounds and you had them both vaginally, I'm like, see, you can do this. So providers get into your head of being like, oh, you have a big baby, you automatically need intervention. And I've been at a birth where somebody birthed an almost 11-pound baby vaginally. And it's totally possible. Our bodies are absolutely amazing. So I'm like, okay, she has to come on and talk about her experiences with us. So I'd love for you to just dive right into it with baby number 1.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a little bit of context. When I always tell people when I was a child and a teen, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, kind of quote unquote, with my life, except I knew I wanted to be a mom. And I have a really fulfilling career now outside of being a mom as well, but it's something, it was always a dream of mine. So I'm kind of a type A personality that does research and prepares and learns and educates, and then, works really hard and gets the desired outcome. And so I was 27 at the time, and I kind of approached preparing for birth and parenthood in a similar way of doing a lot of research and reading a lot of books. And at the time, it was more blogs, not Instagram as much, but blogs and such. And just, did a lot of preparation. I took at the time, the birth preparation class I took was a Lamaze class, which I don't even know if that's still around, but this was back in 2011. And actually, interestingly enough, the woman who taught the class is a registered nurse, a pediatric nurse, but she is also a doula. And that was the first time I'd ever even heard that term. It was a group class, really enjoyed what I learned. I did not know much about natural birth aside from, the bit I learned in that class. I was approaching the birth kind of open as to what I was seeking. I didn't have a set plan of natural birth or medication. I was kind of open to how that experience went, and trusting my OBGYN a lot. And I will say I had seen that OBGYN for probably 8 years. So into, starting in young adulthood through my 20s. So I had a lot of trust in this person, and really kind of looked to her to guide my pregnancy and all along. And I recall when I was maybe 30 weeks pregnant, it was in my third trimester, she shared with me that she was going to be going out on medical leave for a knee surgery when I was 37 or 38 weeks pregnant. And I remember being a little panicked about that because that was not kind of according to my plan, of course. But she assured me she had another practitioner with her in the practice that was very similar to her, that she would have me start seeing at 37 weeks and everything would be fine. And I should also mention, because I do think it's relevant to the story, the practice that I was being seen had grown significantly over the years that I had been a patient there, from being a couple providers, owned by the providers, to being bought out by the health system, the hospital that the health system that owned the hospital, and had changed a lot. And it was very, the office was beautiful and really professional, and everything was automated and everything, I remember being very impressed by, how it was like going into a spa when you were waiting in the waiting room. And that was like, really, I really liked that. And I liked that everything was electronic medical records. And this is kind of before that was standard. And so it was interesting, and I'll share kind of later why I think that's relevant. But so we got to 37 weeks, and I had my first appointment with this provider, this second provider. And to be honest, I cannot even recall her name. I don't think she's with the practice any longer. I tried to look up the practice and she wasn't there. But this doctor, did an exam. I was 2 centimeters dilated at the time. Actually, go back. I was 38 weeks pregnant. My last appointment with my provider was 38 weeks. I was 2 centimeters dilated, which is what I had been the previous week, because they told me we'd start checking at 37 weeks. So this is what we do. And she told me that it seemed like I had a really big baby. And for reference, I'm an average sized person. I think I had gained maybe 35 pounds in my pregnancy. And I felt, of course, you feel giant when you're that point of pregnancy, but I wasn't someone who had gained, 100 plus pounds during pregnancy. But she said, let's have you get an ultrasound next week before your 39-week appointment to get an estimated fetal weight for us before your appointment. And so I said, okay, was excited to see the baby again. It had been, a number of weeks since I'd seen the baby. So went in, had the ultrasound, and then went immediately following to the 39-week appointment. And of course, the doctor, just shared, okay, we're estimating this baby to be at 9 pounds. That's a really big baby. In the final weeks of pregnancy, they can grow, up to a pound, half a pound to a pound each week. And so we really don't want you to go much longer. 9 pounds is a really big baby. So we wouldn't recommend induction. And at that point, again, this is a brand new person to me, but I'm trusting kind of the process and the practice. And I also was really craving going into labor on my own, having learned what I learned in Lamaze. And so I said, okay, well, what's the latest that we can schedule this? What's the longest I can wait so I can try to go into labor on my own? And she said, well, we'll set induction for your due date. So at 40 weeks, we'll set an induction. And I, of course, left thinking, okay, I can make myself go into labor before then. And I did all of the things that they recommend, the curb walking and the eating spicy food and pineapple and bouncing on a exercise ball and all the many things. And no such luck. And so went in on, I think it was a Thursday night. They had me come in late at night, 9 or 10 at night, to get Cytotec or Cervidil, one of the cervix ripeners. And, they lay in a hospital bed in labor and delivery, and you get this and you get hooked up to an IV. And I'm sure many women have had this experience. You don't sleep. You are in a hospital room with constant beeping and lights and people coming and going and nurses coming and checking on you. And so I don't think I slept at all that entire night. And at 6 a.m., I really hadn't progressed any at all noticeably. And so they said, okay, we'll start Pitocin. And so again, I was on an IV, and I probably had brought 2 suitcases like I was moving into the place, and I'd also brought an exercise ball. And I remember saying to them, okay, I want to get out of the bed and I want to sit on the exercise ball and kind of move around. And the nurse at the time was a really young nurse, recently started. And she said, well, when you do that, that moves the band that we have on your belly monitoring the baby's heart rate, that moves the band. And so we really can't do that, because that means we can't read the baby's heart rate constantly. And so I said, okay. And I just laid in the bed, right? I, tried to watch TV, tried to read, there's not much, you're having really painful contractions from the Pitocin. And so, I kind of was a good student in following the instructions and just waiting. And the contractions continually progress longer and more intense, closer together. And every time, one of the doctors, sometimes it was a hospitalist, sometimes it was my doctor, my assigned doctor at that point, came to check on me. I had made no progress. I was still 2 centimeters dilated. And my cervix was, I believe, anterior. So she could not I think it kind of means it's facing like tilted a bit towards my back, if that's correct. Looking to you for confirmation. But so she said, I can't really, get a good sense of how effaced you are, because I can't get my hand, from the angle in there well enough to check. And I can't break your water because I can't get the instrument into your cervix to break your water because of the way your your cervix is tilted. So, it was interesting because looking back, a lot of the language was your cervix isn't cooperating. It's, not facing the right way. And at the time that didn't really register. But it's interesting when you're in that kind of vulnerable position, how it feels for somebody to be telling you that your body is not, quote unquote, cooperating, your body's not doing the right thing. And again, type A, people pleaser, I want to be doing the right thing. I want to be following the process like I'm supposed to be, quote unquote, following the process. And then late afternoon, a friend of a friend is a labor and delivery nurse at this hospital. And she and I had been exchanging text messages in anticipation of this. And, she said, let me know if you're going to be in. And I had let her know the day before. And she came on to her shift, and she came in. And I remember she was like, what are you doing in the bed? Let's get you up. And I was like, I'm just doing what I've been told, and she said, let's get you
How
up,
many hours
took
had it
them
been
on the.
now?
So this point, probably 8 to 10 hours on the Pitocin. And then, plus 12 since, or, another 8 or 10 since I'd been there in Cervidil,
Okay.
and in the hospital bed.
Okay.
And so she, took off the monitor, got me up out of the bed, and immediately was like, showing me different positions to get myself into that would help my pelvis, help my body progress, help use, the gravity of the baby, this big baby, to help my cervix progress. And that feeling of someone kind of being there with me and saying, hey, let's do this, let's do this together. My husband at the time, he'd never gone through this. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what to do. He was following instructions, but we weren't really getting instructions on how to progress this. It was just kind of just wait, just wait, just wait until your cervix cooperates. And so I'll never forget um, Karen and how she was essentially my doula. I always kind of look back on that and say, like, you inadvertently were my doula without me hiring you to do it, because she was the one who gave me permission and encouraged me to really use my body and walk around. I remember her being like, come on, she said, let's walk. I said, well, I'm in the IV. She said, just bring it with you. And so we walked the hallways, all sorts of things. And that was when the trajectory of that labor really changed, because after maybe 3 or 4 hours of working with her, when the doctor came back again, my cervix had had tilted towards the birth canal. And at that point, the doctor said, okay, I can break your water now. That will help get labor going. She broke my water, and within minutes, the contractions, really picked up. I will say, I skipped over this part. Once my contractions really started picking up, I did get an epidural, which is, I don't regret. I was exhausted. I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to get a little rest. I've been awake for 36 hours at this point. And so she broke my water, things progressed. I had gotten the epidural, and I did sleep for probably 35 minutes. And then they came in and said, you're 10 centimeters, you're ready to go. And I pushed for probably less than an hour, maybe 55 minutes. And I can also remember at the time, the doctor and one of the nurses, not the nurse that had been with me, but a different nurse, having a conversation while I was in labor about raccoons getting into their
Oh
trash
my
can. And
gosh.
I remember thinking, I can't believe you're having this conversation in front of me while I'm in labor pushing a baby out. Like, it was kind of insulting, to be honest. It just was this very like laissez-faire kind of, I don't know, like they weren't present in what it was like I wasn't even in the same room or in the same sphere as them. And I was my so focused on obviously what was going on inside of me that I didn't even have the words to communicate. Can you not have that
Right.
conversation right
Shut up.
now? Right. Like, I'm sorry, what? Anyway, I didn't say anything. I pushed, like I said, for an hour. First baby, she was born. We didn't know she was a girl. Found out she was a girl, and at that time, this was kind of before a lot of the practices of like staying with the baby and baby directly on your chest and all that was commonplace in hospitals. So I did get to hold her. I have the pictures. I still have my gown on. So she wasn't skin to skin. She was on top of my gown, wrapped in a blanket. But they took her from me to weigh her, and she was 10 pounds, 3 ounces. And of course, we were shocked that she was 10 pounds, but I was also really proud of myself that I was able to give birth to her. She was perfectly healthy, high score, APGAR scores and all that. I will say, they took her not pretty soon after birth to the nursery. I was having some bleeding, some postpartum hemorrhaging. And so they said, we're going to keep you here in labor and delivery for an extra hour to monitor you, make sure everything's okay. I think I had like a stitch or two. And I can tell you, I remember the feeling of being in that room by myself. You know, my parents, my in-laws, everybody had gone to see the baby, gone to the nursery, and I was laying there alone thinking, well, geez, I just did all this hard work, and not
Right.
only was my baby taken, but everybody else is, gone with the baby, and I'm kind of just here by myself. And I definitely had a kind of like disconnected type of feeling. And I'll briefly mention it, but I did have postpartum anxiety and depression after that pregnancy, which was pretty onset pretty early on. And she was not a great sleeper and didn't follow any of the rules about baby sleep that I had read in the books.
Right.
And I think, that attributed to it a lot. But I also think my expectations
Right.
of how the whole process was going to go, how motherhood was going to be, how breastfeeding was going to be, all of those things also contributed to my emotional experience after that birth.
Support for today's episode comes from Jenny Kane. We are calling all mamas This Is Your Month. Jenny Kane makes for the perfect gift for you and all the women in your life. Think minimalist meets luxury. They have the most classic, comfortable, and California-inspired clothing, from cotton or cashmere to flowy dresses that you're just never going to want to take off. They have elevated everyday basics and wardrobe essentials, and getting dressed is easier than ever. When it comes to investing in an outfit that'll last, I like Jenny Kane. For a limited time, the listeners are going to get 15% off their entire order. So go to jennykane.com and use code CHAVA to get 15% off. I want to tell you a couple of pieces that I love from Jenny Kane and why I've chosen to go with them. I know that I've talked on here before about wanting to revamp my closet, and I'm really trying to be more minimalistic and just have some staple items that go with everything that I can dress up, dress down, throw a jacket over, or that can be mixed in with different outfits. And Jenny Kane has so many of those classics. I am a big fan of the cropped linen crew neck. It's going to be great in the warmer months, but also in the cooler months as well. It's the perfect pullover for a night out in the summertime, or again, once it gets a little bit warmer as well. You can wear it all day long, but it's just so comfortable. I actually got it this spring, so I was enjoying it while it was still really cool outside. And like I said, for date night, for casual, it can dress up, dress down. It goes with everything. Another one of my must-haves for the summer is going to be the leather knot sandals. I got the black leather knot sandals. And again, they go with everything. I can wear them with a cute jeans and a t-shirt or a summer flowy dress. There really are a go-to sandal and a core piece that you can use all season long. And all their pieces are really meant for that. They're meant to be simple, luxurious, have great quality, and have timeless design that you can make work throughout the seasons with anything that is in your closet. So find your forever pieces at jennykane.com, and the listeners are going to get 15% off your first order when you use code CHAVA at checkout. That's 15% off your first order. JENNIKAYNE.com, promo code CHAVA. Mamas, this is your month. You deserve this.
And that all plays into kind of preparing for my second
Mm-hmm.
birth. So I had made the decision to go on Zoloft, which I was on for probably 6 to 8 months, starting around 8 weeks postpartum. I did see a counselor. Both things helped me a lot. I can, breastfed my daughter till she was a year. And then I think she was about 13 months when she weaned. And then when I was pregnant again, when I found out I was pregnant, and due in September, which was going to be 2 years from my daughter's birth, my firstborn's birth. I remember thinking, okay, I need to approach this much differently. I need to approach this with a much more open mind, first of all. And I wanted to look for some other alternative ways of preventing that postpartum anxiety and depression that I had experienced with my first. And a lot of this, after having been a mom for a year at this point, I also had learned the lesson, really hard lesson, that children are not, they don't follow, any rules. Parenthood is very much a learning experience for everyone. And to give myself a lot more grace than I had originally kind of gone into it with. I have 4 kids, and my oldest is still, she is still not a great sleeper at almost 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But she's just, she was her own person and a different person. And my experience, going from 0 to 1 was the hardest transition of all than from any others, because I think of those expectations I had on myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. I think 0 to 1 was the hardest. I experienced the disconnect. I was trying to read every single thing because I knew so much about birth, right? But when it came to parenting, I'm like, wait a second, I have zero idea what to do. And I took like a sleep course. I did like so many different things. And then like my second time around, I was so much more relaxed. I feel like the baby was so much more relaxed. And I just started even just learning more about temperament and kids. Like there's some kids that do sleep through the night at 12 weeks, which they're just wired that way. Like my sister has one kid that's an amazing sleeper. She's 12 now, still her best sleeper. Her oldest, her son, never a good sleeper. 14, still not a good sleeper. Like same thing. It's like there's temperament that plays into this. There's kids that just have FOMO, and it's like you can try all these different sleep things, but it's probably just going to give you like more anxiety, more like, why isn't this working? Why is it, you're supposed to be napping this time, like trying to make these things. So I thought it would make it easier on me because you talk to people, they're like, oh, my kid goes down for a nap at this time every single day. They sleep exactly this much. They go to bed, like, and I'm like, how come that's not working? What am I doing wrong? And it's like, sometimes it's just not you. Like they have different temperaments, and we do need to give ourselves so much more grace and also learn to go with the flow. They're kids. They're figuring it out too. They grew inside of you. Like you're all that they know. And so now they're in this world trying to learn how to function, just like you're trying to learn how to function as a mom. And they're like, wait, I'm used to sleeping inside of you. How am I supposed to sleep outside of you now? Like, there's so much more to it than we try to make it this like thing. And sometimes it's just not. And it's easier to, like you said, she wasn't following the rules. It's like you learn that there are no rules.
And yeah, you're coming at it with, I'm a first-time parent. You're a first-time baby. We don't, we're all learning this. She was the kid that would only want to sleep on me. She didn't want to sleep when she was put down. She wanted to fall asleep nursing every single time. So a bottle or somebody else holding her wasn't even sufficient. It was me 100% of the time. It's funny because even looking back on with my other kids, my other 3 were thumb suckers and all had some sort of little comfort item, a blanket, a lovey, something like that. Her comfort item was my hair. She would twist her little fingers and run her hand up until she was almost 2 in my hair. And to this day, I said she's a preteen now. She's very independent now, but when she sits on the couch, she sits like leaning on me. I laugh because I'm like, even though you are fiercely independent and this preteen and, excited about maturing and growing up, there's some of these tendencies that I still see from when she was an infant. And it's just fascinating. And a lot, of it is perspective. Again, it's so hard when you're in it and you're sleep deprived to appreciate the bonding and the fact that your child only wants you, and that, because it is exhausting, and
Yeah.
it, in all ways, emotionally, mentally, physically exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
But she was such a good lesson for me. And to learn that the benefit of that being my first time is she had all my attention, and I gave myself a whole lot more grace and room to learn and grow with my subsequent children, and my expectations had severely lowered by the time I was having my second.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so, um, so yeah, so when I was pregnant with my second, I did not want to experience that postpartum depression and anxiety I'd had with my first. And so I started doing some research on ways to prevent that. And I had come across placental encapsulation, which, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's where after you deliver, you retain the placenta. So you deliver the placenta instead of the hospital or a birth center or wherever you're delivering, discarding it, you retain it, you keep it. And then a professional who is trained in placenta encapsulation dries the placenta. So the placenta is a very nutrient dense, rich organ that supported your baby through the previous 40 weeks. And so they dry it like they would dry, beef to make beef jerky. And then pulverize it into a powder, and it's encapsulated. And so you take it just like you would take another supplement. And so I had done a lot of research on it. I'd found a woman locally who does placenta encapsulation and had learned about the process. It's much like food preparation. They use the same standards that they use for, cleanliness and sanitation for food preparation. And so in this woman's case, she would actually come into my home to prepare it so that it wouldn't actually leave. It would go from the hospital. My family would take it home in a cooler, and she would prepare it in my kitchen. And so I had decided to I decided to do that. And I'd also decided to hire a doula. And like I said, my class had been taught by a doula. I reached out to that woman who had taught the class. She was booked. She was one of very few doulas in the area at the time. And she had given me a couple recommendations, and I interviewed 3 women. They came into my home, we talked, and I immediately felt a connection with one of them. Her name's Amy. She's still a friend of mine to this day. And so I hired Amy as my doula. And so she had also, verified for me the woman who was doing the placenta encapsulation. And what I loved about Amy is Amy's a PhD research scientist. So she is a very smart, very educated, she's in research. So she, cares about data and facts and information. And so she brought a really cool perspective to being a doula of, of facts and information and knowledge. And, there being, like I said, a type A person, some doulas or some people in the birth work industry can be a little out there and kind of, have no regard for data and facts and things like that. And Amy was such a great marriage between that and knowing she had had 2 home births with her 2 children. And she brought to the table the knowledge, information of facts and data of not the fear side, but the reality side, right. Of birth. Not this is the worst case scenario, but this is what happens most often. Here's what happens with intervention. Here's what happens, in these kinds of things. So she was an amazing support system for me through I think I hired her maybe midway through my pregnancy, around 20 weeks or so. So she was great to just text and ask questions and give me resources and such. So I recall at around maybe 30, 32 weeks, I had brought up the placenta encapsulation, the fact that I was going to wanted to do or had planned to do a placenta encapsulation. and had hired a doula with my provider. Now I was back to seeing my initial provider, the one that I had seen, who was not there to deliver my first, and it was funny because her reaction was very unanticipated. It was very much met with, I was very much met with some caution, hesitation. When I mentioned a doula, she didn't seem super excited about that. And then when I mentioned placenta encapsulation, she completely dismissed that. It was very much, I don't know anything about that. Actually, I can remember her saying, I don't know anything about that, but that just sounds like a bad idea and something you shouldn't do. And my first thought after I left that appointment was, if she doesn't know anything about that, then why wouldn't she learn about it? Why wouldn't she, say, you know what, I don't know anything about that, but let me do some research and let's talk about it at your next appointment. So that bothered me, that her first reaction was, I don't know anything about it, so no, is essentially what she shared with me. And so then I had another appointment 2 weeks later, and I had brought with me some facts and information, some printouts and things. And she took it and she put it on the counter and she said, I just really don't think this is something that you need to be doing. You went on Zoloft last time, that worked. We should just, plan on that next time. Again, very dismissive. And this was nearing the end of my pregnancy. And I remember this next visit. So third visit, after I had shared with her these plans, I was dreading the visit. I was dreading like the confrontation. I was dreading feeling so unsupported. And I left that appointment in tears. And I said to my husband at the time, I can't be dreading every appointment. That is not a good headspace to be going into a birth for. I can't do this. And I reached out to Amy, my doula, and I said, I'm not in a good place with this doctor. Do you have any suggestions of other providers that might have more experience with working with doulas and placenta encapsulation? She said, yeah, absolutely. And she gave me the information for the provider that she actually worked with, who he's an OB/GYN, but he was the OB that backed up her home birth midwife. And so in Virginia, laws are different, but in Virginia, OB/GYNs cannot attend home births. But if a home birth has to be transferred, then obviously for a C-section or further intervention, then a doctor would need to be involved. And so he was the doctor that worked with the home birth midwife to provide that backup care. And so she said, he's amazing, go see him. And scheduled an appointment with him. I was 36 weeks pregnant at this time. I had one more appointment with my provider at 36 weeks, felt completely the same way. And I went to see this doctor. I recall walking into his office. His office was kind of a transformed row house. So it was small, it was narrow. The waiting area was packed. It was small. It was very, everything was paper. There wasn't this fancy, environment and everything. And my appointment was at 4:00. I'd overheard there was women waiting, that had, obviously, as with, midwife and OB appointments, the timing can be hard because they're delivering babies and back and forth. His office was not at the hospital or near the hospital, so he would have to drive back and forth. And I went into his office, and we sat down at a desk. He was sitting at his desk. I was sitting across from him, 36 weeks pregnant. And he said, tell me about you. And I just basically shared, how unsupported I was feeling, what I wanted to do, and I should mention at this point, the previous doctor was also talking a lot about the fact that I had had a 10-pound baby last time, and we should be, proactively taking steps to expect another 10-pound baby, and that, we either needed to schedule an induction before 40 weeks, or we needed to talk about even an elective C-section. And these were conversations that started probably around 30, 32 weeks. So this was well before, you know, kind of that last few weeks of preparation and that, you know, of course played in also to my concerns, because I said to her, yes, I did have a 10-pound baby, and I pushed for 1 hour, and she was born perfectly healthy and I was perfectly fine. So, you know, talk to me about a medical reason why this would be necessary, not a legal reason. And I shared with before that the hospital system had bought out the practice. And it started feeling like every decision, every conversation that I was having with my provider there was, it was almost like there was an attorney in the room that was advising her
Mm-hmm.
based on worst case scenario. And I remember saying to my mom in a phone conversation, I feel like I'm on a conveyor belt.
Mm.
Like, this is the care that's provided. This is the next step. If you have this situation, this is how you're routed over to here. And this is what happens. There didn't seem to be any accounting for, you know, the actual reality of the situation. It just seemed so impersonal. And like every decision was, well, you know, it's less risky for us if you are induced or
Right.
have elective C-section. So when I went into this doctor, I mean, there was literally no, I said I had a 10-pound baby. He said, okay. And, you know, he just let me talk. He had a waiting room full of people. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I should stop talking because he's got all these patients to see. But never at any point did he look like he wanted me to stop talking. He asked me questions. I had a list of probably a dozen questions. He answered every single one with patience and interest in my answer. And at the end, he said, okay, well, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I'd really like to go into labor on my own. And I'd really like to have a provider that would support that. And he said, okay, I can do that. And he's kind of a man of few words. And I will add, I later found out he was the doctor who would go to the medical school here at Virginia Commonwealth University and teach med students how to let women give birth. I mean, that sounds so funny, but like he would teach doctors how to not intervene. He would teach them about labor, about delivery. He would teach breech. He's kind of the provider in the area that's really experienced with breech birth and multiples as well. So he's well known in the area for being a very smart, experienced provider. And he said to me, when I kind of was surprised that was all it was, you know, that there wasn't, that he would take on a 36-week pregnant woman with, you know, all these quote unquote complications, none of which I know now are really complications. But he said, you know, he said, I'm the youngest of four, all of them women. And I learned a long time ago to just close my mouth and do what they told me to do. And so, you know, I saw him. So we did a quick exam. At that point, he didn't check me. Came back at 37, 38, and then 39 weeks. At 39 weeks, I asked him to check me and to strip my membranes, which he did. I had all my medical records transferred over from the other practice. And he stripped my membranes. I was, you know, a centimeter or two, I think, dilated at the time. He wasn't super concerned with that. Stripped my membranes. And that night I went home, for some reason, felt the need to do every piece of laundry in my house and put it all away. And it was about 11:30 at night, 11:40 when I finally went to sleep or laid down. And at 12:05, so about 20 minutes later, I woke up with a really strong contraction. And 7 hours, 7 hours later, my daughter was born. So I labored all through the night, went to the hospital a few hours in, and she was born. I started pushing at 7 a.m. She was born at 7/19, and she was 11 pounds 2 ounces. And I, he, you could barely tell he was in the room. He was so quiet. He just kind of sat there. I had my doula, um, who was amazing, with just, it was that person I needed the last time, like giving instruction and guiding us, me and my husband then, if I was feeling nauseous, okay, let's get, I think maybe it was some sort of essential oil that helps with nausea, or ice on my neck, or, just she knew all of the tips and tricks to help me have a good experience. The lights were low. She had like, those white Christmas lights plugged in that was really calming and soothing. And he just waited, right? He just was patiently waiting. And when I was ready to push, he sat there and waited. And then I remember he said, reach down. And I'm thinking, reach, what are you talking about? And I reached down and he put my daughter's, my hands under my daughter's armpits and said, pull your daughter out, or pull your baby out. Cause again, didn't know what she was. And so I pulled her onto my chest. The pictures are like unbelievable because she is like the size of my entire head. Um, my doula Amy was sweet enough, and at that point we didn't like take pictures of every single thing happening, right? But she took pictures for me, and I'm like so glad to have those pictures because I look back and I think, oh my gosh, my body did that.
Yeah.
Um,
That
I
is like
can't.
she had to, like, because you think about it, because I'm thinking, so my second one was 7 pounds 2 ounces, so your daughter was 4 pounds bigger. Like that's a third bigger, and babies are so small, so she was a big
It was
baby.
She was enormous. They put her on the scale, and I remember I had her skin to skin on my chest for a while and nursed her. At that point, Amy had shared a ton of great information with me about skin to skin and immediate, nursing and all these great things. And so even though the hospital, like I had to kind of push back on the hospital, I had to say no to the nurse about, for an IV. I had to kind of
Yeah.
push back on a lot of those things and set those boundaries. The good thing was, so they said, oh, you're Fitz's patient. Yeah, we won't bother you. Like they
They know.
knew
Yeah.
because he was my doctor, that
You're going to do
they
whatever
weren't
you
going to
want.
push. Yeah, like he wasn't going to come in and like lay down the law like some other physicians might do
Yeah.
in trying to push interventions.
Yeah.
And so when they did take her, after an hour or so and weigh her, I remember like closing my eyes and opening them a couple times, looking at the scale, thinking that just can't be right. That because, yes, she was huge. And at that time I had a 2-year-old. And
Right.
so
Right.
any baby feels tiny right
Right.
next to your toddler. And so they're like, oh my gosh, she's over 11 pounds. She's 11 pounds, 2 ounces. Which was just unreal. And I remember the feeling after that, after giving birth was so different. That euphoria, that oxytocin,
Yeah.
not having the Pitocin in my system for hours and hours, not having the epidural for hours, and, all these, not having all of those drugs in my system, I felt alert, awake, and it was, painful as you can imagine. I mean, you've given birth. It's
Yeah.
not, a pain-free experience, but as soon as she was out, it was pain-free. It was,
Yeah.
just that euphoria. And I thought like, this is what, this is what it should feel like. And he, um, I think I had a stitch or two, again, nothing big, didn't make a big deal out of it. I was holding my baby while he was stitching me up. So it's like, you don't even notice it because you're just so, enamored with your new little one. And, kind of left as quietly as he had come. And I was so appreciative for that experience because it was a very, very different experience than the first time. And it made me think back to, I shared about like the office and the, the technology and all those things that you think, that are noticeable or flashy. And it made me realize like those things play zero into my experience, in giving birth. And As a matter of fact, it seemed to equate to, a less personal experience than it was with someone who, you know, was less flashy, and
Mm-hmm.
systems seemed a little more antiquated and such.
This episode is sponsored by LifeMD. LifeMD has undeniably created a better and more affordable way for people to speak to doctors without leaving their home. The days of depressing waiting rooms, awkward in-person visits, and confusion on who to call are over. You can now video chat with a board-certified physician and get the prescription you need in as little as 15 minutes. So visit lifemd.com/chava today and see why LifeMD is America's most trusted leader in virtual healthcare. I love the idea of this because I actually don't have a primary caregiver. I see my chiropractor and my midwife. And so when I actually need a doctor, I can go to LifeMD and rely on them. And they are there. I got sick this last week, as I mentioned in the beginning of the episode. And for a minute there, for like 1 minute, I thought that I was getting a UTI. And I was like, no freaking way, because UTIs are the worst and I haven't had one in years. So I kept my eye on it and it didn't happen again. It like burned once when I peed. And then after that, it didn't again. But I had even like texted my sister. I'm like, I think I'm getting a UTI. I was so mad. But that would have been a time if that symptom continued that LifeMD would have come into handy for me. Again, since I don't have a primary caregiver, I could have called them and not had to go to a waiting room. First of all, I'm sick. I don't want to sit in a waiting room with other people. And you never know how long it's going to take. So with LifeMD, American's healthcare system is enabling doctors to reach patients in their homes through revolutionary virtual healthcare. And everyone has one thing that they've been putting off to get checked. And with them, there's no excuse. You can talk to an incredible 5-star certified physician in less time than it takes to fold your laundry. I have to be honest, it takes me a long time because I'm a dilly daddler and I hate folding laundry. So it's hard for me to sit and focus it. But LifeMD is quick. And I'm just really glad that I have this information on hand for when I need it. And I almost had to use it this last week, but it is in my back pocket for whenever I'm going to need a physician in the future. So visit lifemd.com/chava now or download their app and see why LifeMD is America's trusted telehealth leader. That's lifemd.com/chava to experience healthcare the way it should be. Now back to the episode.
So, I, my daughter's father and I, went through a divorce, after when my youngest was about a year. The girls were about 1 and 3 at the time. And lived as a single mom for a few years. I then met and started dating a really wonderful man, a couple years after that. And when we had been dating, we knew we wanted to get married. He was a single guy, no children. In fact, he's a couple years younger than me. But we knew we had talked about having more children. He's from a big family of 5. I'm from a family of 5 as well. So we knew we wanted to have children and had planned a life together. And in July 1st, 2017, or I should say the day before, I had been having a really unusual, long, sustained headache and some vision distortion for a couple weeks. A lot of sensitivity to light, and not a kind of typical migraine. I had a few migraines in my life, and this was not that. And it just, nothing would touch it. No over-the-counter medications were touching it. And I had scheduled, I'd seen my primary care physician. He couldn't find anything, but he said, this is really unusual. So let's not try, a Z-Pak. He thought maybe there was an infection that we couldn't see. He said, try this and then come back to me in a week. And if that doesn't work, let's try some other avenues. Well, in the meantime, I had been speaking with an ophthalmologist through my job. I work for a global nonprofit that provides surgical and specialty healthcare for children all over the world. And so I was speaking with an ophthalmologist that we work with. And I mentioned to her, this headache and these eye issues. And she said, that doesn't seem right. I want you to see one of my colleagues today. She's a pediatric ophthalmologist. And the urgency with which she had them call me and schedule an appointment that day, because I had tried to call and schedule and it was going to be several weeks. And she said, no, you need to see someone today. And so I did. And I subsequently was referred to go get an MRI immediately at the hospital. Again, typically providers are not super urgent, and you want them to act with more urgency. And this was the opposite case. I thought, I've had this headache for 2 weeks. We're going into a holiday weekend, a 4th of July. I'll just do it next week. And they said, no, you need to go right now. They're expecting you. And so all that to say, I was immediately admitted and got the news that I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which was a huge shock. I had had no other symptoms besides this headache, this persistent headache, and the vision issues, which I later found out is something called optic neuritis, which is an inflammation of the optic nerve, which is how the ophthalmologist was able to diagnose this before they even had done an MRI on my brain. And so I share this because my boyfriend at the time and I were, very serious, had talked about getting married. And I remember him coming to the hospital and I just said, well, I knew you were getting into a relationship with a woman with 2 children who was divorced. You knew about that baggage, but this is baggage you didn't know about. So I won't, be upset if this is not right for you. And he looked at me like, you're insane. You're crazy. Like, I will be here with you no matter what. And little did I know that days before he had asked my parents, he had called my parents and asked for their blessing to propose to me. So we kind of laugh now that he had to follow through on it because he had already asked. So long story short, I had about a 4 or 5 day hospital stay where I had to receive intravenous IV steroids, and then about a 20-day over-the-counter IV or steroid course for a few weeks. And so over that time, he and I went away for a weekend, which he had planned, and he proposed. And we, at that point in time, when we saw the neurologist, they said to us, well, the steroids will resolve your MS symptoms for right now. The headache went away, the vision issues went away. And they said, MS is a really unpredictable disease. You're in really good shape now. If you want to have more kids, we recommend not waiting too long because you're healthy now. I was 33, I think at the time. No rush, but I wouldn't wait. And so my husband and I, we actually eloped, and we knew we wanted kids. And so we said, okay, let's not wait. And so we got pregnant right away with our first child. And at this point, I kind of knew what I wanted. I called Amy right away to be my doula again. I knew I was going to use the same provider. I knew I wanted low intervention, and I had done more research, and a lot of things had changed in just 4 short years. And the hospital that I birthed at actually did a complete renovation of their women's pavilion and had put birthing tubs, or I'm sorry, labor tubs in all of the rooms, had changed the lighting. So there's none of that like fluorescent overhead lighting anymore. They had extra beds for a partner to sleep in. I mean, all of this stuff they had done in that 4 years between the birth of my second daughter. And so it was really interesting to see just that industry having changed and developed. And, the standard at that point now was skin to skin for an hour, at least, no interruptions, no measurements taken until that hour had passed. I mean, all of these things. So it was really cool to see that having shifted so, much in just 4 years. I mentioned to you, Liz, before we started recording, that I could not get enough birth stories during my pregnancy with my third. I was listening to podcasts with birth stories nonstop. I was cooking dinner and had my phone going with birth stories, just trying to learn about all these different experiences and possibilities and options. Because I think previous to that, I mean, I hadn't had a full pregnancy with my wonderful, provider. I'd had 4 weeks. So I was still kind of learning, all these different options that are out there. It had been presented to me very black and white initially, that you either do this or you're going against medical advice. And so learning that was not the case, was really empowering. So I really encourage people to just be really avid seekers of information and knowledge, because it's so helpful. And I just had a totally different experience, being pregnant with my third, didn't know the gender again. And it was just a very empowering experience. My husband, this was his first. And so I said, okay, well, even though it's my third, it's your first. So we're going to do birth classes. And my wonderful doula, Amy, in that time, by the time I was pregnant with my third, she had actually started with two other women, two other doulas, a company here in Richmond, Virginia called My Birth, and they provide education and support and classes, doulas, postpartum doulas, prenatal doulas, lactation and nursing support and classes. They do prenatal yoga classes. I mean, they have massage therapists. I mean, amazing resource for women. So they had started that. And so I said, okay, we're going to go to My Birth and we're going to do one of these classes. And I still learned so much. And it was so great for my husband, because he learned a lot and also learned kind of when to ask questions and when to just follow my lead.
Yeah.
And so when I was, let's see, I was 38 weeks pregnant. We were anticipating a bigger baby. Now, my husband, obviously a different dad, so didn't know how much that would play into it. I will mention, after I gave birth to my first daughter, my dad mentioned to me, oh yeah, I was 10 pounds, 8 ounces, which I did not know before that. So I do have bigger babies on my side of the equation. But that was really not a concern. I mean, that was not something going into my third birth that was even really discussed with my providers. It was just, all right, you want to go into it and you want to, have low intervention, then great.
Well, they'll probably see, they're like, she birthed an 11-pound baby vaginally. She can do whatever.
Yeah, there was no questioning about it. And so, and again, my provider, he's a kind of a man of few words. He just would nod and smile and be like, sounds good. So when I was about 30, I think I was 39 weeks, 4 days, something like that. I was getting really uncomfortable, of course, at that point. And we were crazy. And a couple months, or about 6 weeks before that, we had found a house that we really loved. And we knew our previous house we had bought when it was just us and the two kids, and we didn't really think we were going to need a bigger house. And then when I got pregnant so quickly, and we're like, oh, it'd be nice to have a bigger house. Well, we found this house, we loved it, and we were crazy enough to put an offer on it when I was, I think, 37 weeks or 34 weeks, 35 weeks at the time. My husband said, don't worry, I'll take care of the whole thing. And true to his word, he did. It was the greatest move I've ever had, because he got me a hotel room at a nice hotel close by. I left for the weekend. I had a hotel room to myself. I ordered takeout. I floated in the pool.
That's amazing.
And my amazing in-laws came and packed my entire house, and then came to our new house and unpacked our entire house.
Amazing.
So I came home on a Sunday and my whole kitchen was unpacked, all the furniture was assembled, all the kids, the kids' rooms were put together. And the few boxes that were left were labeled and I knew exactly what was in them. It was the best. I recommend it to everybody. So it was very stress-free for me at that point, but we were in a brand new house. So that Sunday was our first night in the house, went to sleep. And then on Monday, I started having contractions. And they were kind of all over the place. They would be a couple close together and a little longer, and then it would be 25 minutes and a lot of time would pass. And it was kind of going on like that through the day, through the whole night. I was experiencing the same thing. And then the next day, and it continued. And the next day, but the first day and that Monday, I had gone to work. I had worked most of the day to kind of distract myself, and they were far enough apart that they weren't really, I didn't have to really manage through them. But by Tuesday, I knew there's no way I can go to work today. They were getting more intense, and I was kind of having to work through them more. So I was walking up and down the stairs, doing all of the things to manage the discomfort. My husband came home from work, probably around noon or so. I remember I loved those white twinkly lights that Amy had used in my second birth. So we had all the white Christmas lights plugged in our room with all the lights off. And I remember that Tuesday when the sun set, thinking, oh my gosh, like the sun has set again and I'm still in labor. Yeah. This is the second time the sun has set. And I definitely kind of started to get impatient at that point and started to all I can describe, I don't want to say panicky, but a little very restless. I was, I had, done the tub, but my contractions were still really all over the place. They were not, coming for a minute every 5 minutes. It was, is it 511? I don't know. Can't even remember anything.
They tell you 511 to go to the hospital, but I have issues with that too, because not everyone's labor looks the same. So that's based on an old school thing called Friedman's curve. They want to see your pattern, like your contractions in this specific pattern, but that's just not how physiological labor works with every person. And also we like to say in the birthing world, your first one's usually the hardest. Your second one's really quick and fast. Your third one throws you for a loop.
Yes.
So that sounds like that's what happened to you.
Still is. Yes. And so I was in touch with my doula the whole time. And I remember, around, I think it was about, and my daughters were not here. They were with their dad. So it was just my husband and I. And so I think around 10 p.m., I remember thinking, okay, something feels like it's changing. And I just don't feel like I don't want to be here anymore. I had this feeling like I can't describe it. It was more like, I don't know how to describe it. My contractions were still they'd be really close together and really intense, and then they'd space out and kind of still all over the place. But I remember saying to my husband, Sam, I can't be here anymore. I can't be here. And I don't know why, but he called or texted my doula, and she said, okay, sounds like might be time to go to the hospital. Something's changing. And if she doesn't want to be there anymore, let's get her to the hospital. And I will say, I was trying to wait as long as possible to go to the hospital, because of my previous experiences, again, wanted to labor at home and such. And so by this point, a massive thunderstorm had rolled in, and it was like lightning every, 2 seconds, and thunder and pouring rain. And we go to get in the car, and I remember seeing my husband bolt, hit the garage door and then try to run out the garage to beat the door out of the garage, because we had just moved in this house and didn't have a clicker for our garage door yet. Well, all of a sudden I don't see him anymore. He had blown up in the air and slipped on the wet floor from the rain. And I'm thinking, I'm going to have to drive my husband to the hospital. And thank God he could get up and kind of limped his way over to the car. Um, and my contractions, like, it was interesting because my contractions like immediately picked up. Like, it's only about a 12-minute drive to the hospital. And then I had had several in the car on the way to the hospital, and they had really, picked up intensity and how close apart they were. Um, Got to the hospital, and at this point, I got in the tub. Amy, my doula, met us there. Got in the tub. Was really uncomfortable in the tub for some reason. I tried the shower, tried the tub. The hot water was really not doing it for me. It was like making me feel really nauseous um and just did not feel right. Um, at that point, I believe I had gotten checked, and I want to say when they checked me, they were like, "Oh, you're 4 centimeters," and I can't tell you, I wanted to rip that nurse's head off, and she had done nothing wrong, by the way. But I had been in labor for so long and was so uncomfortable, and these contractions, it was really messing up
Mm-hmm.
me mentally too, right? Like,
Right.
it was like I kept having these like fake outs of thinking it was okay, this must be it. This must be transition, right? That's what I kind of thought when I was like, okay, I have to get out of here. I thought, okay, I must be in transition. And then when she said you're 4 centimeters, I thought, oh my God, I want to kill somebody. Like, are you kidding me? And I was trying all sorts of different mechanisms. That's when we tried the shower, the tub, like nothing was really working. Nothing was making me feel better. Um, and I was really in my head at this point. And I got back, I was trying different positions. And at that point, I remember saying, like, I am so tired. I am exhausted. I haven't slept. I'm like, this baby's never going to come out. I'm only 4 centimeters. And I just said, I just want the epidural. I just want to be able to I just want to be able to rest. I'm so done. I'm just done. And so, they were like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure? And I said, yes, I want the epidural. Well, of course, that doesn't happen right away, right? I don't know how long it was. It could have been 30, 45 minutes, something like
Yeah.
that. All I remember is when they came to do the epidural, and, of course, they make you kind of sit hunched over, and the anesthesiologist behind you to place the epidural. I sitting still felt like literal torture to me at that. I was like, you want me to sit still? I don't know how I'm physically going to do that, for 10 seconds, let alone a minute or whatever it takes to
It's a
place
while.
them.
Yeah.
And um just I was holding my husband's hands because that was the only thing I could do, right? I couldn't move my body and to work through the contraction any other way. The only thing I could do was like squeeze my husband's hands in front of me, and I thought I might like cut off the circulation to his hands. Like, I was squeezing so hard. And the anesthesiologist said, okay, you're done. You can lay down. And I'm telling you, as soon as I laid onto my right side, I hadn't even rolled over onto my back yet. I said to my doula, I have to poop. And she said, hold on a second. And she grabbed the nurse, and the nurse was like, you're 10 centimeters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, so I was going through transition while I was trying to stay in one spot. And so they said, well, just cut off the epidural. I said, just cut off the epidural. Like, just don't even
Right.
bother.
Right.
I mean,
At this point.
and so they got my doctor, and it was very similar to the previous one where he was like very quiet, just kind of let me push. I'm trying to think back. I think I might have pushed for 15 minutes. It was really quick again. Um, my son, and we didn't know the gender. We had two girls. And when my son came out, he spread his arms and legs wide open immediately. We joke about it because it was like he wanted everybody to know he was a boy. And that was such a joyful experience, seeing that. And again, very, very peaceful postpartum, immediate postpartum experience with him, skin to skin, nursing right away, really low key, quiet. The nurses actually, they all leave now. That's their protocol, is everybody leaves the room and just gives mom and dad and baby the room, after placenta is delivered and all of that. I also did delayed cord clamping with babies 2, 3, and 4. That was something I didn't know after baby 1. And I had also decided to do the placenta encapsulation with baby 3 and 4 as well. And I should mention, I did not have the same postpartum depression and anxiety that I had with the first. And, I'm sure it was a combination of factors, but
right.
the placenta encapsulation, surely, like, my milk came in right away. I had a lot of kind of those, traditional positive side effects of the placenta encapsulation that I experienced when I did that with my babies 2 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a great sleeper. He was a great baby. He was a really easy baby, so to speak. He's still a baby. He wasn't sleeping through the night at 12 weeks, but he was a really easy baby. And he is now a typical middle child that is our spirited one. And, we laugh because we look back at those pictures of him being an infant, like, oh my gosh, remember how we thought we were like world's best parents?
Right.
Now he's like buck naked, on our front porch, waving to neighbors.
You're like,
so
sweet.
he is they're all, their personalities are all so present right from the start. It's really amazing. But yeah, so that was baby number 3. And anything else you want me to say about that?
No, just, like I said, in the birthing world, we say that the third ones throw you for a loop. And then we usually say then the fourth ones just walk out. So it's,
well, yeah.
That's what
yeah. So number 4, I was nursing. I nursed all of my first 3 kids, till over a year. And I was still nursing my son, Samuel, when I found out I was pregnant with number 4, which was a little unexpected. I just, didn't think I was going to get pregnant while I was nursing.
So you hadn't had like a cycle back yet?
Trying to recall, I don't think I had. Because he was maybe 6 or 7 months at the time, I want to say. So he was still nursing. He had very little was eating very little solids at that point. Now I will say, just to tie in my MS journey, I had stayed on an injection medication while I was pregnant with my son Samuel, that has been around for quite a long time and is known to be deemed safe during pregnancy. After I was pregnant, with some subsequent MRIs and such, they determined that I was that medication really wasn't doing its job in preventing the progression of my MS. I was lucky to not have had any relapses or symptoms of the progression, but I was having disease progression. So they changed my medication during this time to a different injection, so self-injection medication. And I was having some really bad side effects as a result of that medication. And interestingly, it was just unbelievable anxiety that kind of came out of nowhere. Again, my son was like 7 months old at the time. I hadn't had any postpartum, anxiety or depression or anything, but then all of a sudden it was like, I couldn't breathe, couldn't sleep kind of anxiety. And my neurologist at the time had told me, that this medication can often really magnify other kind of almost dormant or underlying things going on. And so we had made the decision for me to come off of that medication and try something else. At this time is also when I found out I was pregnant. So I was going through some really bad anxiety, found out I was pregnant unexpectedly. So it was a bit of a, I'll be honest, like I was, um, we had talked about having another child, but I was kind of not in a great headspace when I found out I was pregnant at first. There was a lot more tears
Yeah.
than I would like to admit. You know, those first few weeks after finding out, I was really, I was just, yeah, I had a baby still. I was thinking, how am I going to manage this? I wasn't on the right medication, and they were going to change me to a different one, but that one at the time you could not be on while pregnant. So the irony is the medication that had caused that really bad anxiety and other symptoms too. I was having flu-like symptoms for a day or two after my injection. I had an injection every week. So every single weekend, I felt like I had the flu. Well, I couldn't stay on that medication when I was pregnant anyway. So I would have had to come off of it. So my MS, we were kind of in a state of trying to figure out, they didn't want to put me on the one that I was on my first pregnancy because it wasn't working. So it wasn't really worth it for me to be on during pregnancy, but there weren't a lot of other options. So we opted for me to not be on any medication during my pregnancy. Around month 7, I did have an MS relapse. For me, that was similar to my diagnosis. I was having persistent headache and some vision distortion and vision issues. And so I was hospitalized for 3 days to receive intravenous steroids during that time. Of course, you know, the hope was I would go and like sleep for 3 days, being pregnant with 3 young kids, but that doesn't happen in a hospital room. And you're on steroids. So I felt like I was wired for 3 days. Didn't sleep a whole lot. It did resolve my MS relapse and symptoms. And so that was, like I said, I think I was about 32 weeks pregnant when I was going through that. And then by that point, another drug, an infusion drug, had come out and been deemed to be safe. Well, I should go back. I had been doing research on drugs that I could nurse on because I really wanted to nurse my 4th baby. And we did find out the gender this time. This is the only time I ever found out the gender. I thought last time he kind of was a surprise in his timing as it was. So that was enough of a surprise for me. Let's find out. We found out he was a boy. So 2 girls, 2 boys. And so I had been doing a lot of research. I wanted to nurse him as well. And so I had found a drug called Tysabri that is an infusion drug where you go and get an IV infusion once every 4 to 6 weeks. And when I talked to my doctor, my neurologist about it originally, she said, you know, I haven't had any other patients on that drug, but I want to read what you have read about it. I want to, you know, send me what you know. And so I emailed her all this documentation, all these studies. I'd actually found a Facebook group for women pregnant and nursing on Tysabri, and they had shared a bunch of information. I sent it to my doctor, and she called me and said, I really like what you sent me looks great. I talked about it with our pharmacist who's part of the MS clinic. We're comfortable with you doing this. And so I was her first patient ever to nurse on Tysabri. And that reaction was like what I had wished my OB years ago had was that reaction that I was hoping for. So my 4th, I will mention, I had a big event that I was planning. I mentioned I work for a nonprofit organization. And we had our annual gala that raises $1 million on Friday, November 9th. And my due date was the 18th. And I said, okay, I just need to get through, my other last two were born around 39 weeks. So I'm good. I'm going to get through this event and then we'll be good to go. And so the week of the event was on a Friday. I was, getting all the last minute things done, seating chart for 1,000 people, which is fun. If you've ever done it for a wedding, it's like that times 5. And Thursday, the day before the event, I started having some contractions. I actually was interviewing a woman to be a temp for me while I was on maternity leave. And I found the notes from that recently. And I had been timing my contractions on the side of the paper where I was taking interview notes. And I worked the whole day. And I remember I was standing at the copier at one point, and one of my coworkers walked in when I was having a contraction and I was kind of breathing through it. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And she's like, are you in labor? I'm like, yeah, but I'm fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. And, she's like, of course you're a 4th-time mom, because like everybody else was freaking out. And I'm like, no, I just got to get through this one contraction. Everything's good. I had I had a board meeting that night until about 8:30. So I was at my office and I'm like, after I finished the board meeting, again, having contractions kind of quietly the whole time, I thought, I really need to get all this stuff out of my brain, that in preparation for tomorrow, I'm just going to send a really detailed email to my colleague. And it took me about 90 minutes to get all this information together. Just thought, I'm going to be here again. I was still very much, I'm going to be at this event tomorrow, but I'll just feel better if I've given it to someone else, if somebody else has it. So finally went home at 10 p.m. and I thought, I'm going to pour myself a glass of wine. I'm going to get in the tub. I'm going to relax. And this is just like stress, that's kind of making me have these contractions. So I did that and I went to sleep and I had contractions, kind of could sleep through them through the night. And then around 5 a.m. I woke up to like a massive contraction. And I thought, I'm not going to make that event today. Not only that, but I'm not even going to be able to get into the office today. And I got up, I woke my husband up and I was like, hey, get your stuff together. Whatever you've got to do for work today, like might want to cancel those meetings because this baby, we're not going to work today. Now I was a little like cautious because of my 3rd labor having lasted for multiple days and those like contractions being spaced apart. And so I didn't want to get my hopes up, right? I was kind of like trying to distract myself to not be in that headspace of like thinking the baby was going to come and then a whole nother day passing. And so, but that morning, my contractions were like much more intense. And then, wouldn't you know, 20 minutes goes by and I have no contractions. Then I'd have 3 back to back. We were walking loops around the neighborhood. I'm curb walking around the neighborhood, going through contractions. Neighbors are walking by, like saying, hi, everything okay? And then I would have these time frames where nothing would happen. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, here we go again. I've canceled everything. I told my team, like, I'm not coming in. I'm not going to be at the event. You guys got to handle it. And here I am. I'm going to still be in labor tomorrow. And then around, I want to say it was like 10 a.m. that morning, I was texting with my doula and I said, I don't know. They're like really intense and coming really fast and lasting a minute and like 3 or 4 of them. And then it's this weird space between them. And she said, why don't you call Megan? So I forgot to add. So my OB, he had, in the time that I had been a patient of his, he had changed his practice to just being him and midwives. So his practice is actually a midwifery practice. He had added one other OB/GYN who would come in. He's now in his 80s. So at the time he was like late 70s, maybe 80. So he knew he was going to have to be coming up with a succession plan at some point. So he had added another OB who's really supportive of low intervention birth and several midwives. And so my fourth pregnancy, I was being mainly, my prenatal care was mainly being led by one of the midwives. And so Amy had said to me, why don't you just call Megan, you're the midwife, and see what she has to say. And so I called her and I described it to her, and she said, why don't you come in? I just want to let's just make sure everything's good. I kind of want to watch you through your contractions, see,
Yeah.
how you're acting. And that might help give me a little bit more data, to work with here. And so we said, okay. And we got in the car. And of course, I think my body knows as soon as I get in the car, like, that I'm in the car, because then I have like the worst contractions and you can't go anywhere. You can't do anything besides kind of like grip your seatbelt and the handle. I remember we parked in the parking deck. I then got out and had another contraction, as I'm like up leaning on the car. Finally make our way into the office, and she watches me have a few contractions, and she says, let me just check you real quick. Well, I was 8 centimeters at that point.
Wow.
And she said, okay, well, good news. You just need to walk over to the hospital. They're on the same campus. So she said, just walk over to the hospital and meet me in labor and delivery because you're going to have this baby. Was so relieved because I was so afraid it was going to be like the previous time. She was going to check me and I'd be like 2 centimeters dilated. So that was why I kind of didn't want to be checked, because I didn't want to get in my head about that. Walked over. Amy, before, she didn't even bother setting up the room, just got the tub running for me because I really wanted to be in the tub. Got in the tub while she was setting up the room. Megan came in, my midwife. They kind of watched me in the tub and then said, you know what? Let's get out of the tub. And of course, at that time, I'm like, no, it feels so good. It feels so comfortable. I don't want to get out of the tub. Well, I think they knew that, things were happening. And of course, with birth, you've got to get uncomfortable. Comfortable isn't always good. And when you want the baby to come out. So we got out and we tried. I was laboring a lot. She had me kind of holding on, like I was in a squatting position, and she had me kind of holding on to the side of the bed, which that was a new position for me, but it really helped a lot. And I also remember feeling like my body felt like it was going to split in two. It was a really and she said, I remember she was right behind me, kind of like supporting me, like holding my hips. And she said, why don't you get up on your knees, like climb up on the bed on your knees. And as I did that, I took one, like I put my knee up, and then as I was putting my other knee up, my baby literally came out. I was like not pushing. And she kind of like luckily was right there and like caught him. And I mean, it was crazy. It was like so fast. I, didn't even push really. And so then I, laid back. Of course she she handed him to me. I have a picture of me like kneeling on the bed, kind of like midway, just like holding him, clutching him to my chest. And it was like such a, amazing, cool experience. Again, did delayed cord clamping and all that stuff. And he was tiny. So this is, I forgot to mention, my son was 8 pounds, 14 ounces. So he was still a good size, close to 9 pounds. So this is a mom who would have had a 10 pound, 11 pound, 9 pound babies. And he was teeny tiny. And after the hour or whatever, they took him from me and measured him. He was 5 pounds, 6 ounces. So he was half the size of my second child. And, as I mentioned, I'd been on a couple different, drugs and had some MS treatment, which can cause low birth weight. So, they kind of attribute his size to that. the drug I was on originally, was in my system for a few weeks after, then before I knew I was pregnant, can cause low birth weight. So they kind of attributed to that, but he was healthy. He was teeny tiny, and they were having to check he was a little jaundiced and then had low blood sugar. And so they were doing those heel pricks really frequently. Poor little baby. They wanted to take him to the NICU many times, had the neonatologist come up to me and like kind of tell me all the scary reasons why he should go to the NICU and why he should have formula. And I will tell you, I asked for a pump because my breasts were so engorged with milk. I pumped, I don't know, 12 ounces of milk when I was like hours postpartum.
Wow.
And so I said, and normally it's like drops, right? You're getting like drops. I think it was just my body had done this many times before. I was still, I had stopped nursing my older son. He's 17 months at this point, but I could still get milk. You know what I mean? Like, if I squeezed my nipple, I could still get milk out of it, when I was expecting. So I was like, this is not a matter of him not getting enough. You're not going to tell me that he needs formula because he's not getting enough. Look at the milk. He had a great latch, actually, for such a tiny baby. He latched immediately, had a really good latch. The lactation consultants were like, no, he's latched. He's drinking. I said, he's just little, he just needs time. And so I can tell you, I would not have had the confidence to make those decisions and be that sure of those decisions, the first or maybe even the second time. I think there is a confidence that, grows as you experience and learn and as a mother. And he never had to go to the NICU, and we came home and he was a champ and nursed great, was actually another really good baby, really good sleeper. And he's now, I'll never forget it. I think it was his 1 month appointment. He was the 0.6th percentile. So he was barely on the curve, right? Like clinging to the curve. And I was, the pediatric group that we see is really supportive of breastfeeding. And they never told me that, I had to do anything different. I just kept nursing him. And, he's a 3.5-year-old now, 50th percentile, perfectly healthy, and every baby, it starts from a different place, right? Mm-hmm. It was so different than nursing an 11-pound baby. Right. But, he was 4'15" when we came home from the hospital. He was teeny tiny, but still really healthy. And I think, that kind of intuition and confidence that came from having experienced some, other things earlier on with other children really helped give me that confidence that I knew he was fine and he was healthy. And he just needed a little extra time to grow.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So like 4 very different experiences you had with all of your births. Yeah. I have a few questions. So I don't really know that much about MS in general. And what has it been like, I guess, since then for you?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I started an infusion drug called Tysabri. I started it, 4 weeks, I think, postpartum. And I remember I nursed my son through it, literally through the infusion. And I was really, really happy to have had the support of my neurologist and the whole MS clinic team to be doing that. As I shared, I was the first patient to start doing it. And now it's standard practice pretty much everywhere. In fact, now they also are consider it safe to be on Tysabri when you're pregnant. So that was not the case at the time. So it's really fascinating to see how data and medicine obviously are constantly evolving. But I have not had a relapse since I had one when I was pregnant with my fourth son. A relapse can look different for anybody. Essentially, what MS is the kind of deterioration of the myelin on your brain, in your brain, that connects your cells to kind of send information. So instead of various parts of your body functioning like they should, they're getting the wrong message. It's an autoimmune condition where your own cells are attacking and deteriorating kind of that fatty tissue that helps transmit messages. And so the drug I'm on essentially turns off the immune system in my brain so that it doesn't send itself the wrong messages, but it still functions everywhere else. So the cool thing about that is I don't have a compromised immune system for other things. I mean, I have 4 kids in school, 2 of them in preschool. We still, we get all the things that they bring home from school. And, I don't get sick any more often than, my husband does or my older 2. And I go every 6 weeks. I get hooked up to an IV and sit there and, work for my computer for a couple hours while I get this drug. And I'm fortunate enough to have 0 side effects from this drug, which is amazing, because the previous drug, as I mentioned, I had some pretty severe side effects. So, there are, I think 20 something different MS treatments that are FDA approved out on the market these days. Unfortunately, MS often strikes women or in their 30s, in their childbearing years. So, I think it's important for women to know that, you can have MS and you can still have children, you can still nurse, you can still, of course, you've got to find the right providers. And I have an amazing neurologist and team that supports that. And I can, have those conversations openly. My neurologist is like the second person after my husband to know when I'm pregnant, because she can help me, manage it and make sure we're doing the right things. But it's not a sentence to be, to impact your family and your family planning. Everybody's experience is different, of course. People, there are many different drugs and many different options, but I think the most important thing is if you're not finding the care or the support that you're looking for, there are other options. Most of us are fortunate enough to live in places where there's not just one neurologist. It's not one option or nothing. And so I really encourage people to be, advocates for themselves and find the right providers and seek information. Again, some of the best information I've received has been from other people just like me that have had unique experiences. And then when I can validate that with data and facts and then take it to my provider, that has been such a blessing for me, because I know that if I had just taken, the first person's, opinions, whether they're educated or not, at face value and not pursued anything else, I'd be in a much different place.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned in the beginning, you're type A, you love research, you love these different things, and you don't seem like somebody who takes an answer just because somebody gave it to you. Which is great.
I think that's evolved too. Like I mentioned, I'm kind of a reformed people pleaser. I've been on a journey for 10 plus years to unlearn that habit. And I've gotten a lot of practice particularly through my journey with MS and childbirth. I think it's, helped me learn how to speak up for myself, helped me learn how to say no, how to learn to say, I need more, I'm not sure about that, and it's okay to do that. None of these people are the be all end all, right? And just like any of us, their opinions and experiences are informed by what they've directly learned and experienced. And there are things that they're going to experience or learn for the first time. And so I think, and I just, like I said, I think it's amazing. And I love my neurologist. I can't speak her, sing her praises high enough for being somebody who will say, I don't know about that. Let me learn more. And, will support her patients in that process because so much is ever changing.
Right. And I think that that's the important thing to know too when it comes to the medical system is that things are ever changing. And when it comes to, which I've said 100 times on this podcast, when it comes to the birth world, when it comes to that things, a lot of OBs are still practicing on research that is 17 to 20 years old. Whereas like a lot of midwives are like, hey, we learned this really, research came out supporting this really cool thing. So let's do it. Go for it. Whereas providers are still practicing off of things forever ago. So it's hard when you're like, no, like there's so much research to support this and they're not, So it's weird because in the birth world, there's that lag. Whereas like in other medical systems, they're like, oh, there's this cool new research that came out around this drug,
Why is
thing.
that?
I don't know. It's like so infuriating.
Do they not get off call? Like they're on call all the time, so they can't go to like an educational conference every now and then. Like it's really surprising to me why it's not hard to learn these days. I mean, and I would think that there are certain, requirements for continuing education and such, just like in any profession, but it does seem like there's a bit of a lag in obstetrics. And it's interesting.
Well, I feel like how you described like when that first place that you went to, how they began to shift, they got bought out. That's kind of like how it is. Like it's an upper issue. It starts with like, there's people who make these birthing hospital policies that aren't in the birthing world. Right. And then there's also things from insurance. There's like so many things that trickle down to the provider. So when they're treating you with this like cookie cutter care, it's to protect their practice, protect their insurance, this type thing where it's like, we know that if we just schedule an induction, we can monitor you closely, we can intervene if we have to, boom, I'll be fine. Versus if we go, let things just happen and see, whereas 99.9% of the time it's fine. So it's very interesting, and it's obviously a whole nother podcast, but it's cool to be in, like, to have those providers that you can bring research to and that are receptive and working with you. You don't feel like you're, just some inferior person in an office to them, and they're that they actually want to work with you together.
Exactly. It's and it's amazing to see the shift, right? I've had my first child in 2011, my last one in 2019, and was just recently pregnant again. And there's been such a change in protocol and systems, and I'm seeing for the better too, right? It's amazing to see the certain things. There is data proving better outcomes with delayed cord clamping and skin to skin contact immediately, and all of these things that for so long I feel like people were saying and not being heard. And now it's wonderful to see that and see it being supported. Right. I'll add, we had an unexpected pregnancy the end of 2022, and I was on birth control, so it was a pretty big surprise to us. And then because of my MS, I have to be really proactive about prenatal care and my MS care. And so I had scheduled to see my midwife early on. I also, my cycle was a little wonky, and so I honestly didn't know how far along I was. And so but I was getting very positive pregnancy tests, many of them. And so when I went in and my midwife said, well, let's do a quick ultrasound. I didn't know how far along I was. And so she just did it. It wasn't the ultrasound tech. The ultrasound tech wasn't even there actually at the time. And we found out it was twins, and they were monochorionic, which meant they were in the same sac, the same gestational sac. And at the time, we couldn't tell if they had a separation in between them or not. If they don't have a separation, that's a really high risk type of twins, mono twins. There's a high, risk of the cords becoming entangled. So there's a lot of intervention that's kind of required for that type of twins. We were really shocked about the twin component of it. The surprise of the pregnancy, and then the twins, of course, was another added surprise. And we luckily a couple weeks later found out another ultrasound that they were diamniotic, which meant they had their own amniotic sacs within the one gestational sac. They did still share a placenta. So that meant they still were high risk. So we were having really frequent visits with both my midwife in practice, as well as a maternal fetal medicine practice in the same hospital. They kind of work in conjunction together. And at the end of my first trimester, went in for a routine ultrasound, and we found out we had lost the babies. And it was a roller coaster of emotions from the start. And, it's been actually a month today since I lost them. And so it's still difficult, but I will say, and I will add, we did I did have a scheduled DNC, ended up being a D&E because of the amount of tissue with being twins and being 13 weeks along at that point. We did choose to do some genetic testing after the procedure, and we did find out that both the babies had Down syndrome, which babies with Down syndrome come with a lot of other congenital heart or congenital defects, including cardiac defects and things. And so it's very rare that a set of twins, they were identical twins, survives pregnancy. It's, there's a lot of complications. And with monochorionic twins, they share a placenta. So if something kind of goes awry with one, it happens to both. And so, we obviously have 4 amazing, beautiful, healthy children, which helps, helps. And I never wanted to experience, a pregnancy loss. Obviously that's not something anybody ever wants to experience. And, it's hard. It's really hard. Even when, the pregnancy is unplanned. And so I can say I'm only a month in to this grief. But I encourage women, I heard yesterday in a totally different context, grief demands a witness. And I really think that's the truth. And I see women go through this, or have heard of women going through a pregnancy loss and feeling, maybe shame, maybe guilt, maybe fear or inadequacy. I'm not sure why, but they choose, to keep it to themselves or not share, or, kind of bury it, or maybe try not to deal with the emotions. And everybody deals with grief differently. So I can't say my way is the right way, but I also know, the talking about our sons, we found out they were boys. Talking about them and makes it feel like they're, they're something.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't a concept or an idea, or they were very real, and they were very real to us and our family. um and we just say, now we tell our kids we have two guardian angels looking out for us, which my boys need because they are crazy. They need guardian angels. um and there are a lot of people that are willing, they don't know what the right thing is to say,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they can love you through it, and it can help to feel like you're not so alone. Even when other people can't understand what it feels like. My own husband's grief is different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
We've experienced this differently, but um, I just encourage people to not isolate themselves, because it feels very lonely even when you're not isolated. But um, you know, I really randomly, I of course had gotten rid of all our baby things and was being my type A, like, oh, I've got to get all the baby things again. And so I had purchased a like baby seat from a woman on Facebook Marketplace. And we were kind of coordinating me picking it up the week that I lost our babies. And she had messaged me like, hey, did you still want to pick this up? And it was a couple days after I had lost the babies. And, I just said to her, I'm so sorry, this has been a crazy week. This is what happened. And this woman, still don't know her. She dropped off a note and a book to me, because she was going to drop off the seat to me, and she dropped that off to me, and I found it like a week or two later. My husband had put a bunch of stuff kind of in bags, and I was going through some things, and she had a loss. She had lost a daughter at 24 weeks. And, just to feel like, someone else understood. And um, that kindness was so appreciated. And I could not pick her out of a crowd if I walked by her tomorrow, because I don't even know what she looks like. And I just, I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
And so I say this because if there's anyone who has gone through a loss, and maybe felt like they couldn't share, or didn't want to put that burden on someone else, or for whatever reason, that it's okay to do that. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to share, even when there's not a happy ending. And I don't know what the future holds for us and our family, but I know that our twins were meant to be ours for the short time they were ours, and are going to always be part of our family. And I feel really blessed and grateful for that. And to know that maybe there will be a time when I can be that support for somebody else that's gone through something similar.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank you so much for sharing that. And it is hard to like know what to say. Like, I've experienced loss, and I still find it very hard to know what to say to other people besides like, I'm sorry. And when somebody that I know goes through it, I'm always like, tell me how I can support you. Like, let me know what I can do. drop off food, take the kids, whatever it is, because it does feel so isolating when it when the baby wasn't like a tangible thing that people saw. They can't
For
put a
everybody
name,
else.
right?
Yeah.
They can't put a name to a face for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know for me, like I really struggled after, like at first family being like, oh, I'm so sorry, whatever. And then just really feeling like everyone forgot what happened,
Yeah.
you
The
know?
world goes on. Yeah.
But I was still grieving and being like, why is everybody just acting like this never happened? And it did, like, but it can feel isolating. But when you like talk about it, you realize so many more people have gone through it, and you know that you aren't alone in it. And everybody does grieve so differently. It can look so different for every single person. So giving yourself grace and allowing you to grieve, however it takes for you, and your spouse. Often men grieve very differently than women. And sometimes it can be frustrating because their own process is different than ours. So I remember like asking my husband, like, did you not even care? Like, and he's like, of course I do. Of course I care. Like, he's like, I'm trying to be your rock right now.
Right.
And for me, I'm like, I feel like it doesn't even matter to you. And he's like, of course it matters to me. And so it can be hard, like navigating that relationally too. But it's never easy.
Yeah. I don't presume to know the right way. It's been interesting. I've had several women who have shared with me their own losses that they had not shared with other people previously to me sharing my experience with them. And, several of them have said, I wish I had handled it differently. And I think it's not too late either, right? I think as a mother, I described it as like, as soon as you have that life inside of you, like that child has a piece of your heart. And so if you have a loss, that doesn't just close that hole right up, right? That's just going to be, there. That's going to be present, whether it's been a month or a year or 10 years. And the same goes for, infant loss or, I had a friend who lost a baby to SIDS at 4 months old. It's, we just aren't meant to outlive our children, right? As a mother. And I think it's such a different experience for dads. Their experience is a lot more conceptual, than ours is. We're the ones that are feeling and experiencing the changes that impact you every day, whether it's your changing body or how you feel or the foods you choose to eat or can't eat or what you can consume and can't consume and can do and can't do. I mean, all of that changes immediately for a woman when you're expecting. And it's very different, for a man. And so, not to mention my husband is just, we are very different emotional creatures as it is. And sounds like maybe somewhat similar to your husband, his grief is like, okay, let me get, he took care of everything, with the kids and the house and had amazing friends bringing meals. And, from my perspective, I think one of the things that I appreciated were the friends that were like, hey, let me take the kids for, 3 hours on Saturday to the park, give you and Sam a little, quiet time, or let me set up a meal train so people can bring you meals and you don't have to worry about that. It was really helpful when someone like told me, or can I bring you a meal or can I take your kids, instead of me having to kind of like come up with the thing they could do, because that was just like one more burden for me, right? Like one more job for me to like delegate out. It was really helpful when I had people that were able to do that and willing to do that, because it just took that emotional burden, I think, off of me. And you're right, there is literally nothing you can say to make it better except, you know, I'm here, your babies mattered, they still matter, and your grief is okay, and you are in it right now, and the only way out is through.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like labor and delivery. The only way out is through. And you know, when you try to kind of take a shortcut, it often catches up with you. And so, you know, in the many challenges that I've gone through in my life, that lesson has always kind of been prevalent, of just walking through it, you know, one day at a time, and doing the best you can, and not doing it alone,
Mm-hmm.
and not isolating yourself.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing that and for being so open. I know so many people can relate, because again, like you said, there's some people that do not share that.
And that's okay.
Right.
That's their experience and their,
mm-hmm. But it's still good to like hear, because you don't feel alone in it. So even if you don't want to share, you know that others have gone through it and that you aren't alone. Right. And thank you for sharing everything. This was like, it was so amazing chatting with you. Like I said, each of your pregnancies, your births, everything's been so different for you. And then navigating that with your diagnosis and all of that. I just feel like you've been through so much. And it was just cool hearing your story. I love obviously listening to birth stories. I was similar to you, listening to a lot of the birth hour, especially with my second, since I was going to like a birthing center, and just trying to get inspiration. And so it's always fun to hear others' experiences, because I think also, again, like others can relate. I feel like my first two births were very similar to your first two births. So it's very, very relatable. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on. Are there any resources as far as MS or anything like that that you would like to leave? I can always leave a link in the show notes, and or any other links that you would like me to leave people with.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Liz. You're such a light in empowering women and educating and connecting women too. I think that there's such power in just connecting to other people, and kind of drawing strength from others that have gone through and walked similar paths before. You know, like you mentioned, the birth hour, I just consumed voraciously her podcast. I, you know, found a lot of resources and help, I mentioned, from some Facebook groups. I know that sounds silly, but I even found a pregnancy loss Facebook group that I had come across after losing my twins, that was really helpful in terms of navigating and making decisions about, you know, we had lost our babies, but my body hadn't yet miscarried. And so trying to decide how we were going to handle that, learning about others' experiences. With MS, the National MS Society is a great resource for us with navigating that, especially in terms of translating the most recent research and drug options. I really encourage people, if they have access to find an MS clinic team. So not just a neurologist that kind of is a general neurologist, but a neurologist that specializes in MS and has a group of professionals around them. You know, our MS my MS team is a neurologist, a neuropsychiatrist, a psychiatrist, a pharmacist, nurses, physical therapists. I mean, all the people that I could need in navigating my diagnosis are all working together. And so that takes one thing off my plate to be coordinating a bunch of medical professionals to get to work together. So that has been, really helpful for me. And, finding people like you, finding doulas, finding local resources of people that are advocates for women, for birth, are such great supporters. My amazing doula, Amy, has since retired from birth work. She was having trouble managing it, with her PhD, running a research lab and all of that. And so she actually recommended another doula to me who I was in touch with and about to hire when we lost our twins. But, this is a woman who I hadn't even actually hired her yet. And she was, offering to come to the hospital and sit with my husband while I was, going through my procedure after losing the babies, and, texting me to check in on me, and just what an amazing resource and support to be that for other women. So I really encourage women to seek out the help that they deserve.
Yeah absolutely. I'll leave all that in the show notes. One thing before we wrap up, how do you take your morning Java?
Black.
Nice.
My husband and I both take our coffee black, and apparently someone once said serial killers take their coffee black. So I guess we were soulmates meant to be.
You were meant for. I used to, and since then I've become a little bougie, but I aspire to do that again one day.
Yeah. And, I was not a coffee drinker until I had children. So, and now I could not function without it.
Yeah, same. I would do it here and there every once in a while. And then I'd alter between like decaf, regular. Even after one kid, I went back to regular or decaf with my second pregnancy, like just because I don't like too much caffeine. I don't like the way it makes me feel. But after the second, I'm like, oh yeah, I drink coffee every morning. So
yeah, it is a staple. My most love my children, love my family. Obviously, I wouldn't have any more babies if I didn't love them so much. But my most treasured time of the day is 4 a.m., pitch black, dark out, with my journal, my book, my cup of coffee, and quiet. It is, just, it helps me get my mind right. And
wow. 4 a.m. You are a rock star. What time do you go to bed?
These days, I'm struggling to stay awake to get my kids to bed. But usually by 9, 9 or 10, because those mornings do come fast. But when I don't get up early and have that head start on the day, I definitely feel like the day has me. So
you are an inspiration. I always say I need to like get up before the kids, but they're my alarm clock right now. So, but yeah, thank you again so much for coming on the podcast, and I will link everything in the notes. And it was such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful for Andrea coming on. I hope that you enjoyed our extra long special Mother's Day podcast today. And like I said at the beginning, it really just is a journey of motherhood, from having big babies to being a single mom to having more kids and experiencing loss. There's so much that goes into it. Women are absolutely amazing, and motherhood can rock your world. Like, whether it looks from the outside that you've had something traumatic or crazy happen or not, your identity shifts, you as a person change. There's so much that goes into it that's beneath the surface that we do not see. And that just needs to be honored too. So I hope everybody feels special this week. It's so easy to get wrapped up in things that don't matter as well. I know there's a lot out there on social media that you might agree with or not agree with. There's people that are like, it's Mother's Day, I want a day alone. There's people that are like, it's Mother's Day, I want to spend the day with my kids. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong. Everybody's needs are different. Everybody's story is different. And I think that, again, that's what we need to focus on is, I don't know your story, but I know that you're a parent and parenting is tough and it brings up a lot and it drags you through a lot and you experience a lot. So I can't tell you what is right and wrong for you. And vice versa is true. Obviously, there's the blatant ethics of where there's lines that are drawn. Yes. But for other things, I really want to create a community here that is loving and accepting and be that person online, guys. I saw some online bullying this last week and I had posted something about like just being the good that you want to see in the world. Like that begins with us. How you treat other people, your kids are going to treat other people that way. And that includes online, and kids get bullied online a lot. If you have teen girls, that's a big one. So watch out what you say behind a screen to other people. You don't have to put everything out there that you agree with or disagree with. That's not for you to decide. So it is important that we love and respect each other and say, you know what, you're doing things differently. Great for you. Yeah. So happy Mother's Day. I hope everyone has a great week, and we will be back next week with a great episode. Bye.